Every week, I host a 1 hour webinar for small business people all over the country. And we post an edited version of that on our YouTube page. This week, I talked about really what is the one thing that every small business owner should be thinking about on day one of starting their business, and that is, how can I position my business so that one day I can actually sell it? So that's what we're going to talk about today. The heading of this little talk today, what I'm going to call it is the 10 talking points about selling your business, your small business. Okay. So obviously most of the people here, if not all of you, are real estate people. So that's a little bit, so a sole proprietor, independent contractor selling a service business kind of fits in its own little box. You know, I'm getting reverb from somebody. So if you could mute. You know, and I mean, I'll kind of get into that, but I think on the front end, most of you sort of get that, you know, it's kind of a special deal. However, there are some general rules, universal rules that do apply. And I have been involved in the sale of businesses. In 2001, I think it was kind of like, it was either the beginning, or I think it was the second year of COVID. I was contacted by a couple of students of mine who were attempting to buy a national real estate franchise. They were buying their broker's company. Okay. So I got brought in on that too. And, you know, I've been a business guy since I was 11 and started raking leaves around the neighborhood. So I've picked up a few things along the way. Okay. So let me just start with talking point number 1 about selling a business. And you guys have all drank from this cup before. I'm sure you're punch drunk by now. So I'm going to call this appreciation. Get my cap lock to work. Versus cash flow. Okay. So again, here we are just sort of back at the beginning of the game, as it were. 2 completely different words that are always kind of mashing up against each other. And so in a very simple and general sense, what I would argue right now, as we begin our talk about the sale of a business, is that what you are trying to do as the seller is to recognize, actually realize your appreciation. Okay. That is your motivation. That's your reason, or as I like to say, that's your dog in the fight. The buyer of such business typically, generally, has a very ulterior motive, which is cash flow. Okay? Because any buyer worth their salt knows that, you know, you run out of cash and you're dead as a business owner. We all know that. Okay? So with exceptions, and I'm speaking in broad strokes here about a smaller business, you know, professional licensee, independent contractor, that kind of thing, the buyer is looking to increase their cash flow. Okay. So I think that it's really important to remember that. And I'm going to come back and touch on that a couple of times, but I want to start there. Okay. And then, so talking point number 2 came to me when I was having lunch with one of my stock guys the other day. I'm going to call this the Mexican fishing story, which you may have heard. But I think it made a point, it made it well. So the story kind of goes like this, and if I bastardize it, sorry, I'll do my best. I've only heard it once. So there's this fisherman in Mexico, and his day starts at about 10 in the morning. He gets up and he's in his boat by about 11, and he goes out until about 2 and catches a bunch of fish. And then he kind of just does the rest of his day, and that's what he does. So there's this American that's sitting on the beach watching him every day, and he's getting a real bounty of fish, by the way. He's a good fisherman. Like, he knows how to catch fish, you know? And so one day, this American guy walks up to him and goes, "Hey, see you're doing pretty well. And the Mexican guy's, yeah, I do okay. And so the American guy says, what you ought to think about doing is getting another boat. And once you get another boat, you can get a crew. And after you get a crew, you can have a whole fleet. Okay. And now you're really cooking with gas, as we like to say in America. And after your fleet is established and your cash flow is equalized, you can do an IPO, take your company public, and sell it for just a bucket of money. And then the Mexican fisherman looks at it and goes, what would I do after that? He goes, you go sit on a beach in Mexico and go fishing. See the point? Or did I blow the story? Okay. I didn't tell it as well as told to me. I'll work on that. But the point is, if you have an asset that you own, and we can use the analogy of the goose and the eggs. One of the things that you really need to think about as a seller or a potential seller of your business is what kind of income do you want? Okay. And most people will say, oh, I just want a big, I want to cut a fat hog and all that kind of stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. But what's going to happen probably is that you're going to want to invest that for some kind of cash flow. Okay. So once again, it comes back to our old friend, cash flow. Okay. It's a super important concept. And what most people, let me rephrase that. What some people don't really think about is, okay, let's just say I sell this business that I built. What do I do with the money? Okay. Now, as I've told you guys before, I'm 62. So I'm at a stage in my life where the most important thing to me is not investing for appreciation. It's investing what I have for cash flow. Now, and I've told just before too, I have money on the side that I hustle for small appreciation things, like the little house deal we're doing, like buying and selling cryptocurrencies, things like that. It's like less than 10% of my holdings, but I have that too. But for me, at what I call a stage 3 of investing, I care most about cash flow. I have a friend who I met in Park City who was like, I call this guy the intersection of smart and cool. He is like probably the smartest guy I've ever met, but he's super cool. And when he was 42, he sold his company for $1 bazillion. And what his company did was it made drill bits for brain surgeons. Okay. And this was like in the early 90s. So what happened when he sold that that business was he got some cash, and then he got stock of the company that bought him. And then that company got bought, and that company got bought, and so on and so forth. So in the 90s, there was obviously a lot of that going on, as you probably remember. And that's how he really grew the bulk of his wealth, the appreciation part. And that guy just had the Midas touch when it came to real estate. So the last house he did, or the second to last house he did, he bought a piece of land in Park City in 2009, like at the bottom. And they built a house and they sold it. Once it was finished, they lived in it for 2 years, got the exclusion of the primary. They sold it for a $1.5 million profit, and $500,000 of that was tax free. And so, and that's just one thing he did. And when he and I were talking this spring, I went to him when I was kind of in a bit of a meltdown about my portfolio. He's a real mentor of mine. He told me that he is 100% out of the stock market at his age. He doesn't care. Okay. He has several $1 million all invested in high yield bonds. So he locked in when interest rates were high. He's getting like 5.5%, 6%. And he goes, you know what? We have plenty of money. He goes, our money will outlive us. Because he says, I know my lifestyle. We're not extravagant. We own our house, him and his wife. They have no kids. We want to take a trip, we just go. And we're not lavish about it. You know, want to go to Europe for a week or two, we go. Want to go out to the East Coast, see your family, we go. No big deal. You know, we have our farm, we live on the Oregon coast, we're happy. And when it comes to money and lifestyle decisions and, you know, that we'll say 65 plus moment of one's life, I mean, that dude has checked all the boxes. Okay. But the point is, when he got to a later point in life, he was investing for cash flow. In early and middle life, he was investing for appreciation. Okay. And I know this is just, Jesus, Joe, will you shut up about this? When you all start doing it, I will. Okay. I have more to go. Let's stop there. Any questions, comments? I was so happy for 30 seconds to actually see Michael Coe's face for the first time in 2 months. I hope he comes back, but we'll see. Okay. Ben, are you with us? Ben Ramirez? In the wings? Okay. Maliki, how about you? Or Malachi?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Do you got a camera?
Yeah, I'm just at work right now, so I'm just listening in.
Oh, no worries. Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Oh, that's cool. It's just always better when we can see you. Okay. So this next part of what I'm going to talk about is something that was introduced to me when I was in like my mid 30s. It's a book. And to me, it's one of like the top 3 business books I've ever read in my entire life. And so right now I'm going to make hopefully a successful attempt at paying it forward. Right here, this book, The E-Myth. Why Most Small Businesses Don't Work and What to Do About It by Michael Gerber. Now, this is kind of like the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. Now, if you go onto Amazon, there's like 12 versions of the E-Myth, just like there is for Chicken Soup for the Soul. It's the same basic concept. But this book is revolutionary, in my opinion, for small business people. Okay. So what I want to do is borrow, plagiarize, or steal, whatever acronym you want to use, from that book and overlay what I think are very foundational things that author talks about with respect to building a small business that is sellable. Okay. Now, a lot of what he talks about in the book is your point of view, your context, your paradigm, how you see things. And that is just so vitally important. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it, just to say it's vitally important that you understand how you're looking at something. So in the opening part of this book, what he talks about in small businesses is the 3 kinds of people. Okay, and I'll write this down, and you should too. So these people are the technician, the manager, and the entrepreneur. Okay? Take a second, just write down those 3 words. Now let me offer you the Joe Steele definition of the 3. Okay, just kind of a watered down version of his. So the technician is the person who's doing the work. Okay, so most, if not all of your real estate people, you're technicians. You make calls, you drive around clients, you fill out forms, you're salespeople. You put up signs, you write marketing stuff, you know, all of what you do during your day. That is technician work. And one of the ways that you can identify a technician is like this. If the technician stops working or dies, what happens to the business? It dies too. Because the technician is doing everything. Okay. Now I'm going to come back to that. Second word, the manager. What does a manager do? Well, a manager basically supervises the technicians. make sure that they have all the things the technicians need, make sure that they're setting their goals, checking their boxes, all that kind of stuff. In the world that most of you live in, that person would be called your managing broker. Okay, their job is management. And in my opinion, a correctly established company, the manager should not compete with technicians. Okay, and in an earlier conversation before I turned the cameras, I'm not going to say anything. Okay, we can go offline about that. I'll have to edit that part. Anyway, it's not a good idea in any industry, I think, especially when people are compensated commission-based salespeople. You don't want management competing with them. That's ridiculous. Okay, management should make its nut off of organizing and managing the technicians. That's what I think. Got a lot of heads nodding. That's good. Okay, the third person is the entrepreneur. And I call the entrepreneur the keeper of the vision. So the entrepreneur says, this is the way we're going. This is our direction. Okay? And, you know, I don't have to sit here and explain this. You guys get it. All right? Let's pause there for a second. In that somewhat ladder or food chain or whatever you want to call it, with 3 steps on the ladder, most people would default and say, oh, the entrepreneur is the most important person. They make all the money. They're you want to be the entrepreneur. And I understand that. At the same time, a lot of people would say, oh, management sucks. I don't want to be a manager. That's just like herding cats. And sometimes it is. And then there's the technician, okay, which is how most of us have an entree into any industry that we're involved in. I mean, you're not going to walk in and you've never done the thing before and be a manager. That's kind of stupid. Okay. But let me also step back and say this, having been in business for 50 years. There's a lot to be said for matching who you are to what you do. Okay. And I think I said last time, or to somebody, whatever, last couple weeks, another super important book I've read in my life, which is more for people like lost and what to do with myself, but it's called Do What You Are. It's a business. It's a career book whose foundation is in the Myers-Briggs type indicator. If you've ever taken Myers-Briggs, the MBTI, okay. And that is an evolution of human, development and societal development that I think is one of the most important steps we've ever taken as a people or as a world. The idea of, this is who you are. Learn that first and then match that to what you do every day and hopefully make some money. Okay. So this is sort of knocking on the door of the old adage of, would you rather be rich or be happy? And of course, someone's going to say both. Okay. Now, I'm not here to argue either way. Obviously, we live in a capitalist society. Money's important. Would I want to take my last breath and go, fuck, I wish I would have never done that job for 40 years? No, I don't want to do that. No, nobody would. Some people do. My dad was one of them, and he died of a heart attack at 53. Okay. I watched stress eat that guy and kill him. So if it is not your nature, I'll use that word, to be an entrepreneur, okay. Be cool with it. Just understand that there's in any organizational dynamic, there's 3 things. Okay. So when I am in front of a group of people, which that's how most of you met me, I'm taking more of an entrepreneur role. Okay. And so that is a part of my life, one drawer that I live in. But when I'm writing a book, that's total technician work. When I'm, editing videos, technician all the way. Okay. So my argument is maybe a balanced person, and I'm not saying I am because I'm probably not, according to therapists, but you do some of each. All right. But, when I think of when I was in graduate school, there were people there who were just like, and this is in the 80s, oh yeah, I'm going to be a big corporate tycoon. It was the stupidest thing they could have ever done. And they burn out and they bail out in less than 5 years because it's not who they are. It's just not. I remember these couple guys I knew wanted to be stockbrokers. In those days, they'd give you a phone book and a phone and go get them, tiger. Well, those people were not cut from the cloth of monotonous no work. Okay. So you just kind of have to pick your path. All right. But to wrap up this part of what I'm saying, in any organization, I think in any activity, it's good to remember the technician, the manager, the entrepreneur. Okay. All right. Let me pause there again. Yes.
Yeah, real quick. So when you first said entrepreneur and started, I kind of thought of that as the trainer. It's not because that's the person you're saying keeping the vision, but the entrepreneur is the one that comes in and trains the technicians to make that money or make those decisions, or
maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe that's the job of the manager. Okay. Maybe the entrepreneur is the one that says, just to keep it in a real estate context, we're going to build the Tri-Cities from the middle income out. And our mission is to build housing that's $200,000 or less, or whatever the example is. Okay. It's the bigger thought, the bigger point of view. That's the idea behind the entrepreneur, not necessarily training the minions to do it. In a classic organization, that's probably more the job of the manager.
Okay. And then my second question is, so when you're saying the manager should not compete, what is your take? Because Keller Williams is one of the groups here in Tri-Cities that has really, really promoted managers, to hire people. There's like a bunch of little spores going on and a bunch of people underneath them. And I know that those managing brokers are still working real estate, even though they have all these people underneath them. They have the buyers and the buyer's agents and the listing agents and their transaction coordinators and what have you. So what's your take on those type of managers where it's not like I'm managing a Keller Williams or a Sotheby's or what have you, but they're managing their own group within the group?
Okay, let's make sure that we draw a bright line. Are they managing or competing with?
Well, they're competing with them too.
Okay, then I disagree.
I mean, because they're not just they are a managing broker.
Yeah, that's my answer. I disagree, and I'm not going to change it.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's why a lot of people on teams that start at a place like Keller Williams often use it as a springboard because they've learned that doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I'm kind of leading myself. In fact, so thank you, Christine. Is there anything else? I don't want to leave you in the lurk. Okay, let me just go back to one thing you said. When me or you or anybody else is trying to share new ideas with people, remember this, at least how I do it. You have to compartmentalize to communicate clearly with your audience. Okay. And then there's a however. I'm going to go back and hover what you said. Can entrepreneurs be trainers? Of course they can. Sure. It's not like, oh, you can't do that. You're an entrepreneur. Go sit in your box. It's not that way. But I just say this because it's more easy to understand for folks. Sure, there's going to be some cross-pollination. All right. Okay. Now, this next thing, and I'll kind of use what Chris said as to use his word of springboard. This is another really, really, really foundational part of Gerber's writings. And when I read this, nobody ever said this to me before, and it's huge. Do you have a therapist? Me too. Mine says I need to work on getting out there more, take risks, ask for what I want, maybe ask a girl out on a date sometime. But this kind of thing isn't easy for me. But I'm trying to grow as a person, so here goes. Please like and subscribe. Don't make me beg. My last girlfriend did that, and that's why I'm still in therapy. So work on your business, not in your business. Okay, so this takes us back to what I was alluding to earlier, which is, what is your point of view? How do you see your life, your business, and the relationship of the two? I haven't read the E-Myth for a while, I'll be honest, but man, when I was into it, I was just putting that thing in my vein every day. I just thought it was like, this is the new business, Jesus Christ. I was just like, wow, this is awesome. And I had all the audio as well, so I'd drive around and listen to that. And one of the things that he said, I remember one of the talks that he was giving, is he said a huge problem that people make in this whole paradigm thing is they don't understand, this is got to listen to this. You are not your business. You as an individual are separate from your business. And that singular thought that I just shared with you, for me, changed everything. That's the difference between, in actuality, a Schedule C proprietor and a shareholder of a corporation. Okay? It's a paradigm shift. And I would argue that if your intention, which is the whole topic we're talking about today, is to build a business that is sellable, it has to be able to operate without you. Now, if you only have been in the world and your only consciousness and all you know is, I'm a technician, I have a license, I make money, I can buy food, my children won't die from that. Well, that's all you know. And I get it. I'm not dissing anybody. But this is different. This is a separator. When you begin to think about what you're doing every day as, if I wasn't here, would this still pay me? It's key. It's totally key. Okay? And it's key at many levels. Okay, now I've told you guys before, I'm not going to use numbers, but I have a stock portfolio. I've been very honest about that. And it's invested now or it pays me dividends. I don't have to do a goddamn thing and I can get a check every month. Okay? And that's great. Good for me, whatever. But the point remains the point. I don't have to do anything and I still get the money. Okay? So take that idea, and I also own a couple businesses that do that too. But anyway, speaking is not one of them. But in my little world, okay, how about this? Online delivery system courses. I check my email. Oh, I just made, $300, $1,000, whatever. I mean, I did something, but not anymore. It's just the goose lays the eggs. And let me just go on record by saying this. In my own personal experience, that was not an accident. I did that on purpose. I looked around and said, how are people making money and not doing anything? And the first thing I thought of was the Beatles, the rock band, believe it or not. Because I realized real quick, you make a record once and just sell 1 trillion copies of it. It's the same record. And that related to me because I've been a course developer for so long. I wrote Does It Pencil once. Now I've updated it several times, but that's been a big thing for me in my life. I've helped a lot of people, made a lot of money, all that kind of stuff. And the same thought applies. Owning something that pays you whether you do something or not, okay? That is when you build a business. That is something that you work on and not in. That is a foundational point, okay? Now, we've come to this part, and in my usual way, I say way more than I should, and I run out of time. Sorry, but this is really important, and I want to ask you guys, just as a group, and I know this makes sense, but how would you do that in your practice right now? What do you think?
Hire, bring on junior brokers and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think that's job one, is disassociate your labor from the result. What would you do, Kelly? Joe, I hate it when you call on me.
I don't know. I have such a different sort of frame of mind about my business based on my age. I'm turning 65 this month.
Happy birthday.
I've been doing coaching, and, they're so far reaching into the future. And I'm just like, well, I just want to work till I retire.
Yeah.
Don't really plan on retiring anytime soon, but at the same time, I'm not trying to develop my own brokerage or, expand. I just want to make my money until I do decide to retire. You know what I mean? Because I'm not in the growth aspect of a business. I'm at the end of a business life.
Right.
So I feel like my frame of mind is different than others.
Well, yes and no. Okay. So, and I'm glad you said that. And I'm always try to be respectful of the clock. We might go a little bit over today, and if you have to clock out. But I want to get, this is an important thing. And Chris, thanks for asking and bringing this up. So as you just described it, Kelly, the asset that you own is your Rolodex, your book of business, your clients. Okay. And so if you take that basic idea, that's your asset.
Right.
Okay. So a question would be this: when you get to this magical land called retirement, whatever the hell that means these days, how can that asset continue to serve you without your human labor? Now, I had a conversation a couple days ago with one of my best friends who's an attorney, and he lives in Sun Valley, Idaho. And he started dating a woman about a year ago who lives in Boise. And he and I have been talking for years about, dude, Sun Valley's awesome, but it's all just a bunch of painters and carpenters and drunks living here. You're not going to make a bunch of money and be an attorney. You have to go where people are, where wealth is. And that's in Sun Valley. Hang on a second. My next door neighbor has decided that being a logger is his new career in December in the mist. It's kind of funny. He's by himself on a ladder with a chainsaw, and he's got the orange shirt on, the helmet, the earmuffs, the face guard, logging boots, and he's wearing shorts. It's kind of funny.
Geez, that sounds like my husband.
Kind of funny. Anyway, God bless him. Okay, so what my buddy's doing is he found an elder attorney, and he told me the guy's like 75 or 76. And so the deal they made was this elder attorney isn't going to work anymore. He will hand his book of business to my friend who's my age, and any dollars that my friend makes off his clients, he'll just kick the guy back 10%.
Sure, exactly.
Okay, so that's a pretty simple model.
Right. I just have to find a broker when I get to that point that I want to work with, and my, and then I'll just take her, 25%.
Right. And how long have you been in the industry?
10 years.
Okay, so in 10 years, you've built this asset. I'll use the analogy of the goose and the egg. You've got this goose. Again, point of view, you want to think about it as, I own this asset. How can I, re-systemize it? Get to that next. So that it pays me, even if I'm just like, I don't want to do anything today, and I still get a check.
Right, exactly.
Okay, that's all it is. Okay, moving on. So one of the things that, and this is again a Gerber thing, is this book was the first book that introduced me to the importance of systems inside of an organization, inside of a business. He basically argues the importance of the franchise model. And he uses the example of McDonald's extensively. It's brilliant. And his argument is, and these are two words that he uses, and I'll write them down because I think they're just so important. I need to go back and read this book. It's awesome. Uniformly predictable. Okay? And in his application of that cliche, what he's saying is, I can walk into a McDonald's in Pasco, Washington, or Shanghai, China, and I'm getting the same Big Mac. And everybody's wearing pretty much the same uniform. He argues about the importance of uniforms. So the idea of systems and consistency across the landscape of the consumer experience, very, very, very important. I remember he has this one story about a barber who he went to this barber for a long time. And then, because he's like, I get the same haircut every time, I'm happy. And then over time, the guy got lazy and then brought in somebody else and the uniformity went away. And so he went away as a customer. All right. So that's just an anecdote, but uniform consistency, I think, or uniformly predictable, super important. Okay. Okay. Next point. We'll kind of move towards the end here. Let me go back to the beginning. And I was talking about appreciation and cash flow. Sellers at a sale are recognizing cash flow. Buyers are hoping to buy cash flow. Excuse me. Sellers are recognizing appreciation. Buyers are hoping to enjoy cash flow. Okay. One of the most important things I think that any seller of a business can do when they tell their story, and I'm going to use that word on purpose, tell the story about their business, is the story for the buyer must focus on how the buyer's future is going to be better. Okay, so let me make a note here. Better future for the buyer. Okay, because that's what buyers, and I was talking, I did a negotiation course last week, and I told them this too. When you're in negotiation or selling something, you need to remember that what people are buying is the future. They're not buying the past. They're not even buying right now. They're buying from now forward. And so when you're talking about all the goodies and goodness of your business and why someone should buy it, your center focus should be on how their future is going to be better because they bought this business. All right. Okay. What I'm not going to do, and this is by design, is to spend a lot of time talking about valuation. But I'm going to say a couple things. Okay. So the first thing is this. In general, okay, I don't want to be specific here. Say in general, most businesses sell for about what's called 2 to 3 times EBITDA. Okay, so what is EBITDA? Do it this way. Earnings before income, tax, and amortization. So in real estate, and if you take a desert pencil, I talk about NOI, net operating income. Okay. And we talk about something called a cap rate. Okay. So this is the sort of the real property, investment property version of valuation of, in contrast, a business. A business oftentimes sells for a multiple of earnings called EBITDA. Okay. Now, if you have any experience at all, or if you've just been a human being listening to the media in the last 50 years, you've heard about earnings in businesses. Okay. It's a pretty integral part of stocks and all that kind of stuff. So income. It's really important, especially with a smaller business. Okay. Now, this is kind of a crossroads in my view for the independent contractor who has spent their whole life as a technician. Okay. Because they have not built a system that creates income without them being in it. And that's really what a business is. It's something that someone invented that will produce a profit without their human effort. At least that's what I think. Okay, that's what it is. Okay. All right. Okay, a couple of other just sort of like little things, and we'll have a couple minutes for Q&A. Okay. So first thing is this. A lot of times, not all times, but a lot of times, small businesses are sold on a contract, on a promissory note, okay, with down payment, monthly installments, that kind of thing. So in the negotiation on the selling side, because this is about you selling a business, you are the seller, what you really want to try to do if you're going to sell on a note is to construct these deals with what I call the golden handcuffs. Okay. And the golden handcuffs really allude to two things. Number one, you don't want the business back. And number two, which is worse, you don't want the business back because the buyer of the business effed it all up. Now, if you've ever sold a property on a contract and gotten it back, you know what I'm talking about. Christine's going, yep. Yeah. And it's happened to me too. You know, so I get it. So that's really important. I mean, I sold an apartment building about 3 years ago, I think, and it was $1.2 million. And this was a whole tax and through just, I'm not going to get into it, but I did all the Does It Pencil voodoo with the client, their CPA, all that kind of stuff. We decided, and they were in their late 70s with heart failure, so health conditions involved, that the optimal way to sell was on a contract. And so the marketing reflected a lower price in favor of a contract because the seller would make up the difference on interest. And the buyer came in with 50% down. And at that time, we contracted a note for 5 years at 6% interest. And I remember my client was just bitching at me. I want 8%. I want 9%, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, they can go right now and they can get 5. So I'm getting you 6, lady. What do you want? And a year and a half later, when we were in the depths and despairs of COVID, at par, you were at 3%. So I'm like, you're welcome. Okay. But the point remains the point. The golden handcuffs if you're going to sell in a contract. Okay. The other thing that oftentimes happens is the seller is retained for a period of time for oversight and just making sure everything's cool and phasing in and phasing out and that kind of thing. All right. I mentioned earlier that during COVID, I was hired as a consultant to kind of, I wasn't representing the buyers of the business. I was more of just kind of like hired to look over the shoulder, sit in the wings, kind of be their, muscle person, kind of Does It Pencil guy. And the seller had paid a business appraiser, I guess I'd call it, to value the business. And they paid like $1,000 for this thing. And I read the whole report. And one of the things that was really interesting was the author of it said, real estate businesses thrive based on two external dynamics: high employment and low interest rates. And that's exactly what we had at the time that business was for sale. And it was probably valued as high as it was ever going to be given those dynamics. And the seller still said, not enough. And what was interesting about that conversation was, and you've seen me, if you know me, I can wear a lot of hats, but I kind of wore the Does It Pencil guy hat, and then I wore the therapist guy hat. And these two people were partners in the firm, and they were producers. And basically what I said was, do you really want to make the shift from production to management? Do you want to move from being technicians to being managers? And I was very matter of fact. I mean, I wasn't a dick about it, but I was like, let's be honest, folks. This is what you're getting yourself into if you choose to do that. At the end of the day, they didn't buy the business because we ran the numbers and they figured they could probably make more because they were producers without having the headache of managing a bunch of people, which is not for everyone. Okay. That gets back to do what you are. Right. Okay. Two last things real quick. And then if we got some questions, we'll handle those. This is just on the paperwork. Very common, and it should be in the construct and negotiation of the sale of businesses to use NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. Okay. Have one. If you find yourself in this spot, be comfortable with it. Don't be afraid to use it. It's not a bulletproof vest, but in business, it's the best we can do. Okay. Non-disclosure agreement. And my final point to you is this. And if you don't remember anything else about today than this, and you find yourself selling a business, please, please, please write this down. In fact, I'll write it down so that you guys make sure that you write it down. We'll call this, and I say this with reservation for obvious reason. Okay, please. Pretty please. In the 34, 35 years, whatever it's been, that I've been licensed in this industry, I have been in local, regional, and national conversations where I've said it is a fool's errand to allow a realtor a license to sell a business when they have zero training about how to do it. And I don't care how swell you think that your press hard 5 copies contract is. Use a lawyer, and use a lawyer that's done this before, like a lot of other things. Okay. Because remember, if you're the seller, there's 2 things you're trying to avoid once you reach price and terms. You don't want it back, and you don't want it back trashed. We're a custom manufacturer, and we don't do online ordering. Contact us and we'll work with you to build a custom order that's right for you from sample to finished product. You can learn more at jstill.com.